Hey, I'm Julia Yorks. I'm a professional screenwriter, and in today's video, I'm going to teach you how to pitch a television show or movie. There really is no right way or wrong way to pitch a TV show or a feature, but this is my way, and it has been pretty successful for me. I'm actually known for being someone who is really good at pitching, and sometimes I think that my pitching skills are even better than my writing skills. And that's actually not something that is too crazy, because a lot of times in order to get a writing job, you have to pitch both your take on a TV show or movie, and you have to pitch yourself for the project. So pitching is a pretty invaluable skill to have as a screenwriter. So I created this course because I wanted to share my tips and tricks and experiences in pitching with all of you. But my disclaimer about pitching is that it's not really a skill that you get to utilize until you have representation as a screenwriter. You really don't get to pitch a TV show or movie to a network or studio without representation. Before that point, it's largely your script that is your calling card, not your pitch. But once you do crack that entertainment industry door ajar, very quickly people will be asking you to pitch both your own original ideas and also on OWAs, which are open writing assignments, where a production company or studio has a premise, say a log line or maybe a book, or some sort of IP that they own the rights to, and they will ask you to pitch your take in the hope of hiring you and bringing you on to write the actual script. And when that process happens, it happens very, very quickly. I've had to pitch a take in a week on something for an open writing assignment. So pitching is a skill that you might not need yet at this point in your career, but once you do need it, you need to learn how to do it quickly. So even if you're not yet in a place in your career where you are pitching right now, it is still a really great skill to be honing, because it's a skill, just like writing. So even if you're not in a place in your career where you need to be pitching yet, it is a really great craft to hone, because it's actually a lot of work to be able to weave a narrative story orally. So in this video, I'm going to take you through a real pitch of mine. It was a pitch that I pitched to Netflix and Hulu and ABC Studios, and it didn't go, but it was still a really great pitch. I'm still surprised that it didn't go. We had a lot of great attachments on the project, which just goes to show you how difficult it is to sell things. And I know the biggest fear of newer writers is that your ideas are going to get stolen. And so I'm sure it feels pretty bold for me to get out here and pitch on a project. But this project was actually based on IP. It was based on a best-selling series of books, and a production company who then brought me on to work on the show, they had bought the rights to this IP. And unfortunately, they lost the rights to it. Their deal ran out. And so ultimately, there's not really much that I can do with this pitch anyway, because I don't own the rights to the project. So I figured, why not turn it into a really cool teaching tool? So the way this video is going to go is I'm going to pitch you the pitch as though you were an exec at Netflix or Hulu, and really do it in the way that I did it in the room. And then afterwards, I'm going to break it down step by step, bit by bit, why this worked, why I made the choices I did, and kind of show you how to apply it to your own pitch. So let's get started. Before I actually start the pitch, I just want to talk a little bit about the logistics of pitching. So when I pitched this show in 2019, we were actually doing physical in-person pitches. So that meant that I would have my pitch in hand, but it was pretty much totally memorized. And I would just go into these meetings and you would pitch for a bunch of studio execs alongside of your producers and maybe your manager. But ever since 2020, most pitches have actually gone remote. And so that is actually a huge opportunity for the screenwriter, because what you're able to do is actually put your pitch right on your computer, and while you're in the Zoom room with the people that you are pitching to, you're able to basically just read right off the screen, which is pretty invaluable. And so when I do the pitch, I'm actually going to be doing it into my computer, which is just right below my camera frame. And so I'm gonna be acting as though I'm doing this pitch to a Zoom room of people. So I'm not going to be looking at you guys, I'm gonna be looking at my computer because otherwise I feel like it'll just be a little bit distracting for you all. And I think one of the major things that you will see in the pitch is that while I am reading off a document, it doesn't feel like I'm reading. It feels like I'm performing. And I think that is really something that helps take my pitches to another level. But I guess you guys will get to be the judge of that. So now, without further ado, here is my pitch for Lilydale. We open on a house party in New York State where newly minted high school graduates rage their faces off with all the friends they will soon leave behind. Haley, who is a pretty blonde, waits impatiently for her bestie to stop locking lips with a football player, to no avail. So she leaves the party alone. It is a rural town and it's late and there is not an Uber in sight. So she actually starts to head home on foot. And soon a car approaches. It is a Crown Vic with the light on top, and a man in the driver's seat flashes a badge, scolds Haley for walking home alone, and offers her a lift. And she accepts. But as the man locks the doors behind her, Haley starts to sense that she has made a terrible mistake. And she gives him directions to her destination, but he doesn't follow them. He doesn't say another word. He just stares straight ahead, his lips curling into a terrifying smile. And Haley slowly feels down the passenger side door, plotting her escape, to realize that it has no handle. And as the car speeds off away from the center of town, all we hear is her blood-curdling scream. This is Lilydale. Lilydale is a 1-hour character-driven supernatural thriller, and our logline is, after her mother dies in a tragic accident, Calla Delaney moves with her grandmother to the small community of Lilydale, New York, a town that's populated almost entirely by psychic mediums. And our comps are Veronica Mars meets The Vampire Diaries. This just feels like a new, fresh take on those old CW classics. So the world of the show is really this town of Lilydale, from the turn-of-century Victorian houses to the unpaved dirt roads to the wrought iron welcome sign that looms over the town's main gate. Lilydale is really a place that time forgot. But the town's not only a window into the past, it really is a window into another world entirely. And the cool thing is that Lilydale, New York is actually a real place, populated by real people with psychic abilities. According to their website, there are currently 51 mediums who reside in a town populated by only 185 people. And there is actually a statute in the town that in order to have residency, someone in that home must be a psychic medium. But with its vintage vibe, beautiful lakeside locale, and connection to the spirit world, Lilydale is also a haven for tourists. So every summer, tens of thousands of people arrive in the Lilydale Assembly, what the town is called, each hoping for a brush with something extraordinary. But during the off-season, The crowds disperse, and Lilydale becomes a ghost town, if you will, home only to the few locals and the spirits of the deceased. With a winter wind comes a chill in the air that isn't solely from the weather. Because in a town where everyone can talk to the dead, nothing stays buried for long. So let's get into our pilot. After that opening that leaves us all tense and scared, we come back to our main character, Calla Delaney. She is 17, she is headstrong, she is brave, and we open on her, unfortunately, attending the funeral of her mother, Stephanie. We flash back throughout the eulogies and the tears to this one moment that really changed everything, where Calla came home from school to find her mother dead at the bottom of the stairs. And at this funeral, we meet the important people in Calla's life, namely Odelia Lauder. Odelia is Calla's maternal grandmother, Stephanie's mother, and she feels more like a stranger because Odelia and Stephanie actually didn't speak for most of Calla's life. We also get this glimpse of a man in an ill-fitting suit, and Calla doesn't know who he is, but something about him gives her pause. And finally, the funeral's end nears, and it's Calla's turn to place a lily of the valley, her mother's favorite flower, on the casket. But as she lovingly tosses it onto the grave, the emerald bracelet that adorns her wrist, a gift from her mother, falls off. Just unreachable, gone, just like her mother being lowered into the ground. Now, with her mother dead and her father gone, Calla must leave New York City, her home, and move in with the grandmother she barely knows to a place that she's never even heard of, Lilydale, New York. Upon her arrival, she becomes instant best friends with her next-door neighbor, Evangeline Taggart, 17, adorkable and a little insecure, and she gives her this grand tour of the town. And so we're really introduced to the people who will shape Calla's next chapter, including taciturn J.C. Bly, Blue Slayton, who is the town golden boy, and of course his ex, the mesmerizing Willow York. Evangeline explains to Calla that after this weekend, after Labor Day weekend, the city that's currently packed with new age types and history buffs will be a ghost town, literally, because Lilydale is a place comprised almost entirely by psychic mediums, including Calla's grandmother, Odelia. Calla's arrival is the talk of this very small town, and she immediately garners the attention of Blue, which in turn attracts the ire of his ex, Willow. But as if by some inexplicable, almost electric force, Calla is drawn most to and most perplexed by J.C. Bly. Because on her first day of school, J.C., this kind of loner, pulls her aside without so much of an introduction to deliver a simple prophesized warning: stay away from the lake. The encounter leaves her shaken, but oddly intrigued, because who doesn't love a mysterious man, right? But the real twist comes when Odelia is visited by a distraught woman and her daughter. Quiet, blonde, and beautiful, the girl seems very sweet, and Calla gives her a welcoming smile, thinking little of it. Until that night, when mindlessly flipping through the channels at Evangeline's house, Calla stops on the news, and suddenly her jaw is on the floor. Because on the screen is a photo of the girl she saw that morning at Odelia's house. Her name is Avery Bennett, and she's been missing for nearly 2 weeks. And then it hits her. Avery Bennett is dead, and Calla was still somehow able to see her. That night, dazed, Calla goes into her room at Odelia's, the childhood room of her mother, and she's trembling from this revelation. And she takes off her earrings and puts them into this jewelry box she's had since she was a child, the kind with the spinning ballerina and that eerie tinkering song. And there, resting on the pink velvet, is the emerald bracelet Calla accidentally dropped into her mother's grave. So let's talk about season 1. The spine of this season really centers around 3 central stories. Number 1, we have this serial killer storyline that we introduced in the teaser of the pilot. Number 2, it's Calla adjusting to her life in Lilydale and to her newfound gifts. And 3, it's Calla learning more about her late mother. So let's start with number 1. The major arc of the first season is our serial killer storyline. And Peter Struck is a killer on the loose in this rural tri-state area, targeting young blonde women. And now Calla is seeing his dead victims. And it's a race against the clock for Calla to use her developing psychic abilities to save more women from meeting a similar fate and ultimately find this killer before he finds her. That's really our Veronica Mars element of this show. And number 2, to talk more about Calla's journey, entwined in this, broader season arc, is her quest to really adjust to her life in Lilydale, which includes trying to harness her newfound spiritual gift. And she does this both in order to help these missing girls, but also to try to make sense of the world around her, because as Calla soon finds, being a medium can be really overwhelming. So in the pilot during Lilydale's summer season, this town is packed with new age hippie types and also these history buffs in old-timey costumes. But as the fall arrives, Calla begins to realize that these lingering modern day visitors who she thought were just in costume might actually be ghosts of Lilydale's past. And so this means that Calla has been seeing and feeling spirits before she even stepped foot in Lilydale, and maybe even before. So it's a lot for her to process, especially because the only spirit she really longs to connect with, of course, is her late mother, and on that front, she's really drawing a blank. Apparently, it is very difficult for mediums to channel their own loved ones. In fact, it's difficult to channel anyone without the proper training and introspection. So for that, Calla relies on Evangeline, who is also a medium, still a novice herself, and JC, who has his own supernatural spiritual gifts, with whom Calla has a will they or won't they relationship throughout season 1. And spoiler alert, they will. So throughout this process, Calla makes mistakes. It's a learning curve. One of which is she insists on helping an elderly widow that Odelia turned away, and he wants to connect with his late wife. But unfortunately, at the end of the episode, we reveal that this man is actually a con who targets sick elderly women. And so his late wife got wise to his ways and hid away all of her financial bonds before her death. And unfortunately, Calla, in her attempts to help this sad, widowed man, served only to lead him right to the items that this late woman had hidden from him. So Calla knows that her grandmother would gladly guide her through this mediumship process, but she still feels skeptical of her because, after all, Odelia is practically a stranger, and Calla's mother hadn't talked to her in nearly 2 decades. And not to mention, there are Calla's dreams. So the third kind of bullet point about Calla and her relationship with her mother, upon her arrival in Lilydale, Calla is awoken every night at 3:12 a.m. by the same dream. And it is a dream of her mother and Odelia, and they are arguing, they are fighting about what. Calla is unsure, but they keep talking about the lake. They keep saying that their only choice is to dredge the lake. And Calla wakes up every morning in a cold sweat, just thinking about her mother and Odelia and the lake that JC warned her about the very first day she arrived in town. So that lake actually plays a key role in the climax of season 1. In our very dramatic season finale, Calla is excitedly trying on her new purchased prom dress when Peter Struck, this deranged loner and serial killer, strikes, Because after all, Calla is the one who's been foiling his plans. She has been starting to thwart his abductions. She has been locating the bodies of his victims throughout this season and sending authorities in his direction thanks to her psychic abilities. Peter grabs Calla out of Odelia's home, hits her over the head, and drags her lifeless body to the lake where he weighs her down and throws her in. Unconscious and drowning, Calla has a vision, and it's her mother pulling her back towards the light while showing her flashes of the day that she died. And in her visions, Calla sees a hand push her mother down the stairs, and Calla's eyes snap open in the water as she realizes that her mother didn't die on accident. She was murdered, and Calla fights with all she has to break free of the weight and swim to the lake's surface, saving herself. By the end of season 1, the reign of our serial killer storyline arc has come to an end, and Calla is finally safe. That's the good news. The bad news is that Calla's prom dress is totally unsalvageable, but miracle worker Odelia has a trick up her sleeve, one of Stephanie's old formal gowns from when she went to prom in Lilydale. And in it, Calla is just the spitting image of her late mother, as evidenced by a photo that Odelia pulls out from an old shoebox. Calla is floored by the likeness between her and her mother, but is even more floored by the man standing next to her mother in the photo. His name is Darren Rowe, and he is the man in the ill-fitting suit from her mother's funeral. A chill spreads through Calla's entire body because instantly she knows that Darren Rowe killed her mother. Season 2, the Lilydale series of books very clearly lays out a roadmap for subsequent seasons of the show, which will follow the same general format as the first. It's a thrilling whodunit with a supernatural twist. And season 2, the main storyline arc really revolves around the mystery of who killed Calla's mother. So Calla is on the hunt to find information leading to the whereabouts of primary suspect Darren Rowe. But the end of season 2 brings an even more startling revelation. Darren couldn't have killed Stephanie like Calla suspected because he died just a few months before she did. The man Calla saw at the funeral was a ghost. So now we have 2 unsolved murders. And what's more, season 2 brings us the biggest shock of all. Darren and Stephanie had a child together when they were in high school, born on March 12th, which is 3/12, the same time that Calla wakes up nightly from her dream. Ever since she arrived in Lilydale, something supernatural, maybe her mother, has been trying to give her a sign. And that sign is that she has a sister. So season 3 and beyond, it's really Calla's quest to find her sister. Along the way, her father, Jeff, who had abandoned the family when she was a child, comes back into the picture. And now we have these 2 unsolved murders of Stephanie and Darren that Calla's attempting to solve. Once more, it's that thrilling mystery adventure made so much more unique because of the mediumship element. And there really are so many elements of Lilydale that give it the potential to be a very successful, long-running show along the lines of Vampire Diaries or Pretty Little Liars. The first is that we already have written season arcs that take us all the way to the end of season 3. We've built in supplementary episodes thanks to the concept of the show, in which Calla can help guest characters coming to Lilydale to connect with lost loved ones. And these stories don't advance the bigger season arc, but they always help to advance Calla's character arc because, with every person she helps, with every person she fails to help, she is learning and growing and further developing her supernatural abilities. And 3, we have options in season 4 to potentially expand our world. The idea that Calla's sister is back in New York City, just a stone's throw from Lilydale, just in time for the kids to graduate high school and go to college. Now we have the situation in which Calla has to deal with her newfound gifts in a bigger world with bigger mysteries, bigger thrills, and of course, even bigger secrets. So that is Lilydale. Whew. So that was the pitch. I did it how I would typically pitch. I did it all in one sitting. I left in if I flubbed a word here or there, any corrections that I had to make, because that's the reality of pitching. It's live. But it was still pretty good, right? And then after the pitch, then it opens the floor up for questions. And so the execs will ask you any questions that they had during your pitch. That's why it's a great idea to do practice pitches. I've done practice pitches with family and friends who aren't in the industry. I always do them with my reps before I go in. And then if I have a production company attached or different partners attached, I do it with them as well. Any questions that they have during the process, I note down and I think up answers to. I also think up anything that I might not have included in this pitch document, but that I might want to elaborate on further. For example, with this pitch in particular, the way that the murdered girls were described in the book series was they were all blonde girls, but something that I thought was particularly interesting when we were pitching to say Freeform was the possibility that maybe these were all women of color who were going missing because, you know, it's unfortunate that in our world, those disappearances aren't always treated as seriously as when a blonde white girl goes missing. And so that's a really important social commentary that we can talk about. That's why Calla's use of her abilities to help find these missing women and to help stop their murders is even that much more important. So that is like an added piece of information that I added into the question portion of the pitching process. It becomes more of a discussion. So I like to think of the question portion not as an attempt for the execs to trip you up, but as an opportunity to provide even more information and more knowledge about the project that might not fit into the pitch. Because as you can see, there's a lot of information, and I think that my pitch ran about 13 to 15 minutes. So it's a lot of time to just you be talking, but it is also a lot of information for the execs to ingest. And so that's why as we go through, I'll talk about why I tried to make things more bite-sized, why I try to number different talking points that I have to just make it all a little bit more digestible. So now that you guys have heard the pitch, I want to kind of zoom out and talk about the structure of the pitch as a whole. That is, again, how I structure all of my pitches that you can, use for your pitches as well. And then we'll zoom back in and kind of look at how I did each section a little bit closer. So the way that I form my pitches is typically as follows. I start with a teaser to grab their attention. Then I move on to kind of the specs of the show, the log line, comps, go into the world of the show, and then I launch right into a pilot summary. And in that pilot summary, I add in my character descriptions so that it feels a little less heavy-handed and a little bit more like I'm just telling a story. I know some people like to talk about their characters individually. I find that it can just be a lot of information that gets tedious, but if you are going to do it that way, I would say try to stick to 3 or 4 characters max that you're choosing to focus on. Then I go into season 1 right after the pilot, and I explain kind of what the big arcs are of that season. I touch on season 2 just a little bit, and then I just brush on future seasons. And so this, with Lilydale, it was easier for me to do that because it's a series of books. So I think there were like 6 books. So a lot of it was already plotted out for me. But when it's your own original idea, that can be tricky to think about what we're doing 3 seasons in the future. So the trick is really just to brush on it lightly to show that you have a plan of where you're going, but not get too in the weeds about the specifics of those plans, because specifics lead to questions that you may or may not have the answers to. So now let's kind of zoom in and talk about each one of these steps piece by piece. We start with the teaser. And if you remember, in my teaser, it was this seemingly unrelated story of this girl at a house party who got into what she thought was a police car and ended up being abducted. And, for me, my goal is always to get some sort of rise out of the execs in the room that fits tonally with the story that I'm trying to tell. And I know it sounds conceited because I wrote it, but when I talk about how she's feeling around for the passenger side door and that there's no handle, I get like goosebumps. And so I know that the execs hearing it for the first time do as well, especially when you end on that visual of just the car driving away into the woods and you're just left on this girl's scream. A teaser like that not only immediately hooks the executives and they're like ready to eat every word of your story, but it also sets the tone for the story that you're trying to tell. We know that this is gonna be a spooky thriller. Now, what if you're writing a comedy? How do you set that up? Similarly, right? Because you want to showcase that you're funny if you're writing a comedy. So what is that one funny beat? It doesn't even have to be the opening of your pilot. It can just be a really great funny moment in your pilot that you're going to open with. If it's a comedy, you need to get them laughing from the minute you sit down. And so you want to open your pitch with a funny moment. Now, I have heard other screenwriters giving their advice, and typically what I hear is that you should open your pitch on a personal moment, on a why you should be the one to write this story and why you have a personal connection to the material, but that it should be about you. And that is something that I am more apt to do when I am pitching myself for an open writing assignment. Because when you're pitching on an open writing assignment, you are competing against other writers for this job. And so part of the reason of why your take is the best take is because you are the best person to write it. So I do understand that, and I have done that when I'm pitching on open writing assignments. When I'm pitching my own original script or, a script that I have been brought on to pitch, I try to focus on the narrative story because there's already buy-in to me being the writer because I'm the one pitching it. But the biggest takeaway about the teaser is this is your moment to set the stage. You're going to be talking for 15 minutes and they're going to most clearly remember the beginning and the end. So if this is a spooky, scary, supernatural drama, give them spooky, scary. If this is a comedy, make them laugh. And that is the same with TV and feature pitches as well. Moving on to the specs of the show. So it's just one sentence where I said, Lilydale is a 1-hour character-driven supernatural thriller. Just very clearly explaining what it is they are going to be getting. Easy, right? And then the log line, in my log line, it was after her mother dies in a tragic accident, Calla Delaney moves in with her grandmother to the small community of Lilydale, New York, a town populated almost entirely by psychic mediums. Now, here's the thing. If this was a log line that I was going to send out to entice people to read my Lilydale script, I would probably have included the twist about and finds out that she's a psychic medium herself. But since this is a pitch and I'm in the room or in the Zoom room with these people, I want to save that reveal because that is going to be a big moment for me when I'm about 8 minutes into this pitch where I might be losing them a little bit engagement-wise and I need something to hit them with. So I'm going to save that critical twist for later on in my pitch to keep my audience engaged. Then I move on to comps. And so these are tonal story comps of existing shows that you think your show is similar to. So for me, I said Veronica Mars meets The Vampire Diaries, and that it feels like a new take on these old CW classics. Now, I would probably only say the CW thing if I was pitching to CW, but I wanted to include it in this pitch so that you guys got a feel for what it was I was thinking. But yeah, Veronica Mars meets The Vampire Diaries. We've got the mystery aspect and also the supernatural element that feels like it gels nicely. Another thing that you want to be sure to do is to pick two shows that were successful or highly regarded. And this goes for movies as well. You don't want to pick a box office bomb and say, yeah, this is what my show is like, because instantly that's going to turn people off. You want to find shows that were popular because the goal is to get these execs to envision this show as a hit. Next, I always talk about the world of the show. And what's really great with this particular example is that the town is almost a character in and of itself. So describing the world of the show feels really cool, really intriguing. The fact it's a true story that in order to live in this town, someone who is in your house has to be a registered psychic medium. That is really cool. That's a cool, fun fact. And that's what is drawing people into this project. The world of the show, if you're talking about a sci-fi show or, some sort of show that has a big world, this portion is really easy, but it also can be easy if you're talking about a small town or, think Abbott Elementary. The world is this school. So it's not just limited to these kind of sci-fi supernaturally shows. So you really want to paint for us the world of the show where we and our characters are going to be living literally and figuratively. And my favorite line, I think, of this entire pitch is, with the winter wind comes a chill in the air that isn't solely from the weather, because in a town where everyone can talk to the dead, nothing stays buried for long. And it's like, ooh, yeah, that's the vibe we're going for, right? So then, like I said, I personally jump straight into the pilot and I talk about my character descriptions while I'm talking about the pilot. So I introduce my characters in the context of telling this story. And that's a little trick, that's a little secret of mine. I personally do that because no matter how engaging a pitch is, one person sitting and talking can drag. Even if you are the most engaging, personable, acty, great performer, it does, just the nature of a pitch causes people to go in and out of interest a little bit. And so my goal is always to get them to be engaged as long as possible. And I think that talking about my characters, just very briefly giving these short, concise descriptions of them, but then more so talking about who they are and what they're doing and their arcs within the plot of the pilot, I think that helps my pitches to not feel as redundant as other pitches that I have listened to. So that could be a fun takeaway. And look, I think that note in particular works best in a very plot-heavy story like this. If we're talking about The Office, I feel like we kind of need to pitch those characters specifically. You want to hear more about Michael Scott. So, because the characters in that case are the comedy, the characters are the story. And in this case, the characters are the story as well, but it's more of their arcs and we're trying to get out all of this plot stuff. So whichever way you want to go with that, I think it's kind of your choice, but this is just a cool trick that I've learned over the course of my career in pitching. And the key of this pilot summary really is all leading up to these two big twists at the end. It's that all of a sudden we realize from seeing this girl's face on the news that Calla sees dead people, and also finding this emerald bracelet that she had dropped into her mother's grave. That's all of a sudden now back in her jewelry box. It gives us that one last like holy shit moment before we cut to black. And so then that brings us into the season 1 wrap up. The way that I broke up the season 1 arcs was in 3 parts, and I said the spine of season 1 centers around 3 central stories. And then I listed those 3 stories all at once up top, and then I went deeper into each one. To me, that is, it's a tactic that I use. That's a tactic that I use in a lot of the pitches that I do when I'm doing TV pitches, because again, the name of the game is to not overwhelm. It's to inform and to keep excited and entertain, but it is not to overwhelm with information. And if you get too deep into the nitty-gritty, again, it just makes it more open to questions and interpretations, and there's more ways to say no. So in my story, those 3 central points were the serial killer storyline, Calla adjusting to her life and her gifts, and then more about her mother, which is going to propel us into season 2. And so I think probably point number 2 about Calla's life, that is the point where I introduced like one episode idea, because this is essentially, it's not a procedural show because there is an overarching mystery that we have to solve, but each episode, Calla, is going to be helping someone figure out something with her gift. And she's either going to be succeeding in that or she's going to be failing in that. But a lot of newer writers, I think, when they're crafting their pitches and talking about seasons, they literally just list out episodes and the plot of each episode. And that is not really the way that you want to approach this season 1 roundup, particularly with more of a drama. With a comedy, if you're pitching a comedy, you can have, in this episode, these are the things that are going to happen, but you mostly want it to feel more like character arcs. And again, if it's a comedy, you got to keep them laughing. So just saying, Dwight pulls the fire alarm and everyone reacts, that's not going to be enough of a laugh. You have to figure out how to paint season 1 and describe what it is you're going to do and those plot and those stories by making them really fun and interactive for you and the execs in the room. Look, even in this pitch, I felt point number 3 of my 3 central stories for season 2, I felt it kind of going a little slower. I felt it kind of dragging a bit, both when I did it now and also when I pitched in the room, but it was story that we needed to convey. It was plot that we needed to get out because it featured very heavily in the book series, and it led us into season 2. And so basically the goal, even when you have kind of those more murky, dragging parts of the pitch, is to get it out quickly and to get to the next portion. So my takeaways for the season 1 portion, I think that it's really important. And I think your best bet is to break it down into digestible bite-sized pieces and also focus really on your character arcs to kind of lead you into the telling of what's going to happen in season 1. And then when you move into season 2, you want that description to be shorter, punchier, only big information that is going to be like, oh yeah, I want to see that in a season 2. And then season 3 and beyond, you kind of, again, just like I said, you just brush over that with a very broad brush, but that feels interesting to the execs. And again, even when I was talking about season 3 and beyond, I broke that down into even more digestible bite-sized pieces, talking through some bullet points like, number 1, we already have these season arcs from the books. Number 2, we have built-in supplementary episodes thanks to the concept of the show. And number 3, we have the option to expand our world in season 4 because her sister is in New York. And like I said earlier, the pitch itself, shouldn't have too many gaping holes, but there can be things that you don't say. There can be things left unsaid because, like I said, you can then fill in some of those blanks in the question and answer portion. And I always have a bunch of bullet points written down of things that I want to get into that portion of the pitch that didn't quite make it into the bigger pitch. So that's it. That's how I pitched Lilydale. Unfortunately, we didn't sell it, but I still love the pitch. I still think it's such a great concept for a show, and I am in love with the world of Lilydale. And I love the pitch that I was able to craft. And so I hope that this video helps you guys be able to craft a pitch of your own. As always, I'm available for one-on-one consults and script reads to help go over your pitch with you before you pitch it to studios and execs. And also I'm going to be doing a pitching class, which I'll have more details to come on all of my socials. So make sure to follow me at Julia Yorks on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram, and I'll have more information about any upcoming workshops. Now go work on your pitch.